Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're breaking down the Thursday Night Football Showdown slate for tonight on Draftkings. We have the Los Angeles Rams going up against the New England Patriots in what should be a pretty solid game. If you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you're just new and you like what you see, considering that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow. That's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you don't follow me over on social media, the handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, link is down below for that. You can get the spreadsheet, the Discord chat, and all that fun stuff. I think that's it for the plugging. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And up top, we have Jared Goff at $11,000. And he is pretty expensive, but I was playing around with roster construction before I started this video. I found out that you can pretty much play whatever lineup you want, and you can throw whoever you want into the captain spot because there's a massive value play on this slate that we'll talk about in a little bit. But he really opens up our lineups, and you can pretty much do whatever the heck you want. So both quarterbacks are very easy to fit in. We'll start top with the expensive Jared Goff. And he's got the better matchup on paper, DVOA-wise, as New England is near the bottom of the list when it comes to their pass defense. Although I will say that does not match up in terms of their fantasy points given up per game to the quarterback position, because right now they're allowing the fourth fewest points per game, 235 passing yards and less than 1.5 passing touchdowns, and meanwhile being 30th DVA versus the pass. And they absolutely shut down Justin Herbert and the Chargers last week. They blanked them. Keenan Allen didn't really do too much. Austin Eckler, he had about 10 targets, but even then he didn't have the greatest game in the world. And Justin Herbert definitely struggled in that one. So props to the defense on that. Stephon Gilmore being back after he missed quite a few games certainly helps that defense out. So I don't think it's going to be an absolute cakewalk for Jared Goff, but he is playing at home. They have the higher implied team total, close to 25, compared to the Patriots being below 20 in this game. So I think Jared Goff's going to be fine here. And it's easy to know who to stack with Jared Goff because it's Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods for the most part. Yeah, there's some secondary options sprinkled in like Josh Reynolds, Van Jefferson, and the two tight ends. But for the most part, you know that's where the ball is going. So it makes it pretty easy to stack with them. And 3 out of the past 4 games, Jared Goff's been over 300 passing yards, and 2 of those were over 350 passing yards, including last week versus the Arizona Cardinals. We had 351 on 47 pass attempts and only 1 passing touchdown. Did get a rushing touchdown, though, which kind of put him over the top, where he had close to 28 Draftkings points at only $5,800. Although he got a bit unlucky in that game because I really think he had a chance of having close to 400 passing yards and 2 to 3 passing touchdowns. It's just the running back stole a couple of touchdowns, and the pick 6 near the end of the game kept that game not being close. So they kind of just ran the ball at the end of the game. So Jared Goff didn't really get to hit his absolute ceiling. And I rostered Jared Goff in my main lineup, and I was thinking, man, I'm getting an easy 400 yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns. But I feel like he barely threw a pass in the fourth quarter, which sucked. So he could have even had a bigger game, but he's quite the inconsistent quarterback, so I'm not saying he's just a rock-solid play, but overall I like the Rams here, and I think Jared Goff is going to be a fine option, and obviously you want to have interest in a quarterback on a showdown slate, and especially when there's value, and there's value on the slate to be able to fit him in. Same goes for Cam Newton. Now it's a pretty tough matchup here versus the Los Angeles Rams. They're allowing, like I mentioned earlier, the second fewest points per game to the position, and their 4th DVOA versus the pass, so I'm not expecting Cam Newton to have a huge game through the air here. He's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game, less than half a passing touchdown per game, which sounds absolutely awful, and only 25 pass attempts per game. This is a team that likes to run the football, but the thing is, Cam Newton is one of the main guys that's going to run the football, especially around the goal line on this team, which always gives him upside each and every single week and kind of gives him a nice baked-in floor. He's actually averaging about 40 rushing yards per game, which is a passing touchdown. 4 points equals a passing touchdown over on Draftkings, so you have a nice floor there, averaging close to double-digit rushing attempts per game, a rushing touchdown per game, and he's always pretty much the main threat around the goal line, so that's always going to give Cam Newton value, and he's been pretty solid for the most part this season, and I say that in the sense that he's usually pretty cheap on main slates. And really only 2 times this season he's absolutely killed you. Week 7 versus San Francisco, where he had 2.8 points. It was an absolutely awful game. And then Week 12 versus Arizona, which actually was quite recently. He had only 84 yards in that game, 2 picks, and really didn't do anything in that one. But besides that, he hasn't really been that bad. He's had a couple of pretty solid games as well. So Cam Newton, I think, is a safe, solid play here. With the value we have, it's not that hard to fit him in. So you're definitely looking at multiple quarterback builds on this showdown slate. And with that being said, I think we can move on to the running back position, which is not what I'm really looking forward to here because both these backfields are pretty busy. And it's going to be pretty hard to pick which ones we want to throw in our lineups in this one. And starting up top, we have Damien Harris at $8,800. Instead of talking about all these guys individually, like down the list here, let's kind of group these guys in and their team backfield. So let's talk about the Patriots first. And let's take a look at their snap counts the past 3 weeks since week 11. So Harris, he's sitting at 38%, 64%, and 49%, and that's going from week 11 to week 13. James White sitting at 57%, 38%, and 28% of the snaps. Now, it was pretty low last week, but you got to keep in mind they won that game by 45 points. So he's the main pass catching running back, so you don't really have to throw to your running backs too much when you're winning the game by 47 points. Then Sony Michel, no snaps in week 11, 2% of the snaps in week 12, and then up to 33% of the snaps last week. But you got to keep in mind, like I just mentioned, they're blowing that team out. So if it wasn't a blowout, I would assume those snaps would have been much lower for Sony Michel. But all three backs should at least have a role in this game. Now, the matchup versus the Rams on the ground, they're a pretty tough defense. They're 7th DVA versus the run, and that correlates right with how many fantasy points per game they're giving up, as they are allowing the 7th fewest points per game, only 78 rushing yards, and about half a rushing touchdown per game. Now, they are giving up over 5 catches per game, which I guess could suit James White well, but overall, I'm not super excited about anyone in this backfield. Now, Damien Harris, PFF absolutely loves him this year. He's their highest graded running back, which, you can have your own opinions on that. I can't myself say Damien Harris has been the best running back this year, but with the way they're grading, with the way they grade players, they really like him over there. He's doing a lot of right things, and he's going to be the main threat on the ground here. Sony Michel should have at least somewhat of involvement, but it's probably going to be a handful of touches, and for the most part, those are going to be on the ground. Both these guys aren't really involved in the passing game whatsoever. On the season, Damien Harris has a 2% target share, and Sony Michel in limited time has a 3% target share. I know he caught a pass last week for around 20 yards, which was, I guess, nice to see. But James White, obviously the main pass-catching threat here with an 18% target share. And also Rex Burkhead, he's on the IR, so he's not going to be playing in this game. But on the season, he has an 11% target share. So that's just kind of a boost for James White in that regard, as he's really the only threat through the air in that backfield. And with them being 5-point dogs on the road, I could definitely see James White's services being needed. So if I had to rank these guys from how I like them in fantasy relative to their price points, I would say James White's probably the best point per dollar option there. Then Damien Harris. It's hard to pay $9,000 for Damien Harris because he's not really going to be a threat through the air. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're probably not going to be happy with his price point, because I have a hard time seeing getting over 100 yards rushing. He's averaging only 70 rushing yards per game this season and 14 rushing attempts, over 5 yards per carry. But if he doesn't get into the end zone, you're probably not going to be too happy there. And James White, he can get a handful of catches, which certainly boosts his floor on a PPR site like Draftkings. And Sony Michel, he was kind of just involved last week because of the blowout. I can't really see that happening again. And I think the Patriots will probably be trailing in this one. So Sony Michel, if he gets you like 5 carries, is that really going to be enough at nearly $5,000? So he's definitely probably the worst point per dollar option there, in my opinion. Then moving on to the Rams backfield, we have Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson, and then Malcolm Brown. This is definitely a busy and tricky backfield, one I don't really like to target for DFS purposes, especially on main slates. But unfortunately for us, it is a showdown slate, so we have to try to figure out this backfield. So looking at their snaps since week 11, Cam Akers has been at 17% in week 11, then so on, 27% in week 12, and then 63% last week, which was nice to see. You got to keep in mind, Henderson did leave that game early on, and it was kind of the Cam Akers show after that. He had a season high in touches. He had over 20 carries. I think he had a couple of targets. Got into the end zone, had a whole bunch of goal line opportunities. So it was nice to see from Cam Akers, and if they do that again, Cam Akers would obviously be the guy that we want in this backfield here. Henderson, since week 11, 46% of the snaps, 32%, and then down to 22% last week. Did leave the game for just a little bit, came back in, ended up getting a nice long touchdown late in the game, but overall didn't have that many touches. Then Malcolm Brown, 36% of the snaps, 40%, then all the way down to 16% of the snaps last week. So it's definitely a tricky backfield. I would say Cam Akers is the guy that you want here, followed by Henderson, and then Malcolm Brown at $2,400. Now, he is pretty cheap, and if he gets a handful of touches in this game, including a couple targets, he could end up being the best point per dollar option in that backfield. It's just the touches are very hard to project on this team. I'd say just volume-wise, Cam Akers, Henderson, then Malcolm Brown. But yeah, keep in mind Malcolm Brown is around $2,000. He's at a massive discount, so there's definitely appeal there over on DraftKings on this slate. Then after that, can't really recommend anybody else. Maybe Jacob Johnson gets a touch or two, but it's nothing you can really rely on. I don't really think you have to go that deep anyway. So moving on to the wide receiver position, up top we have Cooper Kupp followed by Robert Woods, the two main wide receivers for the Los Angeles Rams. And these are the two guys that you know who to stack with Jared Goff, because for the most part, this is where the ball goes in this offense. Both these guys have similar numbers, and I say it every single time they're on a slate that I always prefer the cheaper option if you have to pick one. Now, I think you can certainly play both on this slate. You shouldn't have any problems being able to do that. But if you have to pick one, I'm always going to usually side with the cheaper option here with Robert Woods, although I will say he probably has the worst individual matchup, as he should see a decent amount of Stephon Gilmore in this game because he doesn't typically go into the slot much. Only been in the slot 17% of the time this season, and that's where Cooper Kupp's going to be for the most part, as Cooper Kupp's been in the slot at 61% of the snap. So Robert Woods should see more Stephon Gilmore, which is obviously a downgrade there individually, but they should be able to find ways to get him the ball. And both guys are great for DraftKings because they're really good PPR wide receivers because they're both possession guys. They're not really going down the field too much. They both have similar ADOTs. Kupp's at 6.7, meanwhile Robert Woods is at 7. Both have similar targets, although Cooper Kupp is slightly more targeted at 25% target share this season, and Robert Woods is slightly over 22% target share. So very similar wide receivers, and they both kind of do the same thing. If I had to pick one, I will side with Cooper Kupp here, just projection-wise, although both guys are pretty much the same play. I just feel like he has a bit of a better advantage here in the slot compared to Robert Woods. But both guys are very similar plays. Now the matchup versus New England, they are 30th DVA versus the pass, but they're only allowing the 6th fewest points per game to the wide receiver position, so I don't think it's going to be an absolute cakewalk here. But on a showdown slate, I definitely want exposure to both these guys. So if I can fit them both in my lineup in addition to Jared Goff, I think that would be one of the main ways you want to go on this slate, especially in cash games. I would probably try to make sure I get Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods both in my lineup. Last time these guys were on a showdown slate, you pretty much wanted both because they both went off. Then dropping down to the New England wide receivers, I feel like we should talk about snap counts just a little bit more because it's not as obvious as the Los Angeles Rams wide receiver group, because we have Jacoby Myers, we have N'Keal Harry, we have Damiere Byrd, and we have Gunnar Olszewski. I think that's how you say his name. Someone told me in the comments last time. I heard his name on TV when they were showing that punt return touchdown. But he's got a great first name in Gunnar. And then we have Dante Moncrief, who's involved as well. So if we're looking at the snap counts for all these guys in the previous week in Week 13, Myers led the team at 84% of the snaps. Damiere Byrd was second with 78% of the snaps. Harry at 51%. Moncrief at 22%. Gunnar was at 9%. And Matthew Slater was at 3% of the snaps here. So it's kind of, there's a main obvious play here, and I think it's pretty obvious that it's Damiere Byrd at only $800. Like, why is he this cheap? He's a full-time wide receiver in this offense. He pretty much gets targets each and every single week. I don't understand the price tag on Damiere Byrd. I don't know if DraftKings algorithm absolutely messed up here, but he's a massive value on this slate. But before I get ahead of myself, we'll talk about Jacoby Myers first at $6,800. He is technically the wide receiver one in this offense, but he has certainly cooled down after that big couple of games he had. I believe the first one was against the New York Jets, where he was on the showdown slate. Absolutely went off, had close to 200 receiving yards. On the season, he's sitting around 5 targets per game, a 20% target share, and a 32% market share of the team's air yards. Now, the matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams, it's definitely a rough one, so it's not going to be a cakewalk for any of these wide receivers. And Cam Newton isn't exactly letting the world on fire through the air this season. He's been more of just a threat on the ground. But they're 4th DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing the fewest points per game to the position. So I don't have high hopes for any of these wide receivers. But Myers, the targets, I guess, should be there. But the past few weeks, it's definitely not been great for Jacoby Myers. But really, the main interest on this offense for the wide receivers, I should say, is Damiere Byrd at $800. Like I said earlier, I don't understand why he is this cheap. He plays the majority of the snaps in this offense, right behind Jacoby Myers, and he's $800. There is no reason at all for him to be below N'Keal Harry and Gunnar here. I mean, Gunnar only played 9% of the offensive snaps last week, and he only had 1 target in that game. It actually turned it into a 38-yard touchdown, had a return touchdown as well. But yeah, I don't understand the pricing here. On the season, Damiere Byrd, he's averaging just under 5 targets per game. He's got an 18% target share, 8 out of 12.4. They have a guy with a 1% target share priced over Damiere Byrd. N'Keal Harry, he's got a 17% target share, but only had 2 targets last week. Did end up catching a touchdown, but I mean, Damiere Byrd's obviously the best value play on this slate. Most projection systems, or at least I would hope, will have him as the number 1 value here. So $800, definitely have a lot of interest there. And like I said earlier, it really opens up your lineup. You should be able to fit in Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Jared Goff, and Cam Newton quite easily if you happen to go the Damiere Byrd route. Not saying you should throw him in the captain spot, but he definitely makes a fine flex play. And then some of the cheaper wide receivers for the Rams, and Josh Reynolds and Van Jefferson, both those guys are fine. Both have upside of seeing around 5 targets. Jefferson, I remember in the showdown slates, he used to be close to that $800, $1,000 range. His price is up to $2,600 in this one, so it doesn't make him as nice of a value. He's only got a 4% target share in the season. If you want to get specific, a 4.8% target share, and Josh Reynolds is sitting at a 14% target share, although there's about a $3,000 price difference there. But both are fine secondary pieces, although I'd really try to prioritize getting in the two main guys in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods in this one. And then after that, Dante Moncrief, he'll be on the field a little bit, but it's nothing really too consistent. He's got a 2.6% target share on the season when he is on the field, so nothing too impressive there. But for the most part, if you're going cheap, Damiere Byrd definitely stands out as a massive value on this slate. Then moving on to the tight end position, it's pretty much just the two Rams tight ends here because I never really want to play a tight end for the Patriots. They just don't really have that much value, nor are they too involved. But the two tight ends here for the Los Angeles Rams, we have Tyler Higbee and we have Gerald Everett. And if we're looking at their snaps the past week, Higbee played on 84% of the snaps and Gerald Everett at 72% of the snaps. Both these guys are on the field quite a bit, so both are viable options. And when that's the case, I say why not play the cheaper option over the more expensive guy, because Gerald Everett's about $1,500 cheaper, and on the season he's seeing similar target numbers, so it just makes sense from a point per dollar perspective just to play Gerald Everett over Tyler Higbee. And that would pretty much be my plan on this slate. Now, the Patriots, they've been a bit stingy versus tight ends this year. They've been pretty tough versus quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Although versus running backs, I forgot to mention that earlier, but they're allowing around 100 rushing yards per game. Actually, just so we can go back on there, I forgot to reference that when I was talking about it. But they're 14th versus running backs, allowing over 23 Draftkings points per game, 28th DFS versus the run, and close to 100 rushing yards per game. So in case you wanted to know that when I was talking about the running backs, there you go. But as for the tight ends, allowing the 4th fewest points per game, despite being 30th DFS versus the pass, barely any touchdowns at all versus, for tight ends this year, and less than 50 yards receiving. But if you want to play one of these tight ends, I think Gerald Everett is a nice value play, as he has very, very similar numbers to Tyler Higbee this season, just kind of lacking in the touchdown department. Then for the New England Patriots tight end situation, we have Ryan Izzo, and then Dalton Keene should get some snaps as well. But I would say very limited upside for both these guys. Now, the one caveat we have is that Ryan Izzo is questionable for this game. So if he happens to miss, Dalton Keene is only $200, and he should get like 2 to 5 targets in that game. And at $200, that would definitely make him a decent value play. I'm not really sure you have to go this cheap because Damiere Byrd's sitting there at $800, and we know he's for certain he's going to get targets and have a role in this offense. Just something to keep in mind if Ryan Izzo happens to be out. But as you can see this season, not real much upside here for any of these guys. 1.58 targets per game. Keene's at half a target per game. Then Jordan Thomas is at 0.33 targets per game. And if Izzo happens to be out, Jordan Thomas will see an uptick in usage as well. But I mean, not really too excited to play any of these guys. Now, the Rams, they're kind of mid-pack versus tight ends, but they're just not really that used in the offense. Maybe if Izzo happens to catch a random touchdown, he'll definitely pay off at $1,400. But I would be very shocked if that happens. He's yet to catch a touchdown this season. Jordan Thomas has one, but it's just really hard to trust any of the tight ends here. So I would stick to the Rams guys if you have the ability to do that. Then moving on to the defenses, we have the Rams and the Patriots. I would say both are viable because I don't really think it's going to be too high scoring of a game, but I would obviously side with the Rams over the Patriots just because I want to be kind of Rams heavy in my lineups. Now, I have plenty of interest in Damiere Byrd. I think James White's viable, and then obviously Cam Newton. But for the most part, I'm going to be pretty heavy on Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, and Robert Woods and some of the secondary pieces in that offense. So it just makes sense to want to play the Rams. And the Rams defense has overall been better than the Patriots this season. They're also 5-point favorites at home with a lower implied team total against them. So I would side with the Rams there. Although I know the Patriots defense, for people that like game logs, they went absolutely off last week. So I could see them having an uptick in ownership just because of that. But I would side with the Rams here just given the circumstances on this slate. And then as for the kickers, they are what they are. We have Nick Folk and Matt Gay. Now, I believe Matt Gay is questionable for this game with a shoulder injury. So if he happens to miss, Austin McGinnis, I believe, is the guy that will be in place for him. But they're kickers, so it is what it is. But they are playing in a dome, so you don't really have to worry about any weather conditions here. And really, it's hard to project kickers. So I always side with the team with the higher implied team total because I feel like they'll have more scoring opportunities. So Matt Gay, if he's good to go, he's $300. He's a little bit cheaper than Nick Folk, and I definitely think he's a fine option. It's just that there's always limited upside for the kickers. And I think that's going to be pretty much it for the video, guys. So I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And if you want to follow me over on Twitter or Instagram, you can see that in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you want to support the channel over on Patreon, get access to the sheet. Also, for main slates, I do cheat sheets with the notes and projections and all that fun stuff. So if you're interested, Links down below for that. You could also hop into the Discord chat as well. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'll get out of here. I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be the final thoughts video for week 14. If you didn't already check out the first look video for week 14, it should be the most recent video. And I'll try to link that somewhere, maybe on the screen, or if you just want to search it up yourself, you can do that and save me the time. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.